Welcome everyone to another edition of CollegeSportsMatters.com video blog. My name is Zach Bai, and again this week breaking down the FCS playoff picture. And finally that portrait has been painted, and for the second time in as many years, the National Championship will feature the Bison of North Dakota State University at 13-1 overall from the MVC. They're going to go up against Sam Houston State Bearcats at 11-3 from the Southland Conference. A rematch of last year's national title. Congratulations to both teams, although no road to the championship is easy. Both teams have made it for the second time in as many years. And briefly, before we talk about the matchup itself, let's talk about how both of these teams got here. North Dakota State squeaked by Georgia Southern this past weekend on national television. A game in which North Dakota State really did not play their best football. They ended up having less first downs, less passing yards, less rushing yards, less yards per play, and a less of a third down conversion rate than that of Georgia Southern, but they do enough to win the game. And a part of that had to do with Georgia Southern really shooting themselves in the foot with penalties. Over 100 yards given up on the game, given back to North Dakota State because of yellow flags being thrown on Georgia Southern, and of course the turnover battle won by North Dakota State. Tell me if that sounds familiar if you're a Bison fan. That's been all season long for NDSU. And Sam Houston State again squeaked by Eastern Washington, a game in which I'm sure some of you shut off at halftime. I mean, the score was 35-0 at the break. I thought the game was over when Brian Bell sprinted for that 50-yard plus touchdown run to make it 21-0. They continued to tack it on, and at the break, like I said, it was 35-0. I switched and started watching other games around the television, but flipped back to find out Eastern Washington making a serious run. Ended up outscoring the Bearcats in the second half 42-10. But again, just like North Dakota State, Sam Houston State does just enough to get out of the semifinals with a victory and go back to the national championship game. And this is a Sam Houston State team that a lot of folks wrote off earlier in the season. They went undefeated last year up until the national championship game when they lost to North Dakota State. But they started this season 1-2 after 3 games. And granted, one of those losses was to Baylor down in Waco, Texas. But nonetheless, people looked at the Bearcats, said 1-2, and maybe it's not their season. But yet and still, they go on 7 of their next 10 victories coming away from home, and that just shows me and throughout the season what kind of mettle that this Bearcats team was made of. So congratulations to them of overcoming those odds and getting back to the national championship. So let's talk about the actual game, the national championship coming up against Sam Houston State and North Dakota State. I cannot wait for this one, folks, and if you're an FCS fan, I know you can't either. Let's talk about some of the advantages. At the skill position, I have to give the edge to Sam Houston State. I think they have the better quarterback out of the two if you're going to compare Brock Jensen and Brian Bell. Brian Bell is a 60% completion guy, threw for 24 passing touchdowns this season. I mean, that's good for any quarterback in any league. And then you juxtapose that with the only 7 interceptions that he threw this season. And every time Brian Bell takes the field, he's good for nearly 200 yards through the air. He's also a very capable runner, like we saw this past weekend against Eastern Washington. And then, of course, the All-American tailback, Tim Flanders, who this season ran for over 1,500 yards, just a terrific 17 touchdowns. And every Saturday he took the football field. He averages 113 yards on the ground. This past week against Eastern Washington, he ran for over 230. And it's just terrific numbers from Tim Flanders, a well-deserved All-American award winner as announced this past week. And they also have an All-American in the secondary to Sam Houston State. But despite all of that at the skill positions, I still am going to give the edge on the game to North Dakota State. And this is not because I'm stubborn and chose the Bison to win the national championship when this whole thing started, but this is because their defense, I think, is more pronounced in this game than any other position. And I'm not going to single out one guy on the defense, but I think they're going to have success like they've had all season long, speaking of North Dakota State, just allowed 5 rushing touchdowns in 2012. I mean, think about that for a second. I can't even comprehend 5 rushing touchdowns allowed all season long. You're talking about 14 games being played. They've only given up 10 passing touchdowns. And now you compare that with the 27 passing touchdowns that Sam Houston State has given up. And despite their All-American in the secondary, their pass defense at times has been a little bit shaky in 2012. North Dakota State gives up only 11 points a game. That's incredible for starters, but that's about half of what Sam Houston State gives up, and they've given up about half the touchdowns in 2012 that Sam Houston State has. And I think that the way that North Dakota State was able to shut down Zach Zenner, for example, from South Dakota State, I think that's a good microcosm of what they've done all year to opposing backs. Now, at the time, Zach Zenner was the leading rusher at FCS. They played, South Dakota State played North Dakota State 2 different times. Both times Zach Zenner runs for less than 50 yards. We're talking about one of the leading rushers in the nation, just completely snuffed out of a game. And I'm not saying that the North Dakota State defense is absolutely going to obliterate Tim Flanders in the offensive line from Sam Houston State. I don't think that will happen. But I have to believe that they're going to limit him, speaking of Tim Flanders, in a way that he hasn't been limited this season. And we're also talking about a disciplined team in North Dakota State Bison, and this year only gave up 69 penalties in 14 games. That's really not a lot, folks. And you take a look at how many penalties Sam Houston State's given up. You know, over 100, 105 to be exact. That's a big gap in between both teams. And not saying that Sam Houston State is reckless, but I'm saying North Dakota State is that much more disciplined than the Sam Houston State Bearcats. And I think when you combine that type of defense with the legitimate offense that North Dakota State has, Brock Jensen at the quarterback position, you know, his numbers aren't going to fly off the charts, you know, like Taylor Heineke. No, but he does enough week in and week out to put his team in a position to win football games, as he did this past Saturday against Georgia Southern. And I think when you combine that prototypical game manager at the running back position, you throw it in a bowl and mix it with the 2 guys in the backfield, Sam O'Jury and John Crockett, who again had big weeks, Sam O'Jury in particular. I think they bring enough to the table offensively when you combine it with their defense to win this game against Sam Houston State. Now, folks, I've been wrong before, and I'm going to be wrong again. Sam Houston State may end up on top of this one and win a national title, but for my money, I'm going to say North Dakota State hangs another national championship banner, back-to-back national champions. That's my prognostication. And we'll have to see. I'm going to sit here and watch it just like everyone else. But you can be sure when the clocks hit zeros, this time next week, I'll be on collegesportsmadness.com talking about it. I appreciate you very much taking the time out and watching this video blog. I also thank collegesportsmadness.com for having me. For Zach Bye, I hope I see you next time.